We'll be starting up here in a little over a minute. While you're waiting, it's probably not a bad idea to go ahead and open up your chat pod and your Q&A pod and get ready to raise your hand and download or go to the website for the polls that we're going to be doing. Yes. Sandra knows how to raise your hand. That's good. And we'll give folks another 30 seconds or so to log in. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome to our Thursday webinar. You know, we normally run these on Tuesdays, but we're running this to help the folks who are in our summer intern program. And if you're part of that, we'll find that out here in a minute. And thank you for joining us. If you're not, well, thank you for joining us anyway. So my name is David Orr. I'm the director here with the New York LTAP, part of the Cornell Local Roads program. And we're going to be doing some polls and handouts, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay. Now, uh, if you're interested, we do have other webinars we're holding all summer, everything from emergency preparedness to snow and ice towards the end. And all of these will be recorded, and some of them are worth professional development hours, including the one today, if you stay on long enough. And we'll, of course, have workshops in the fall. And so we'd be glad to see you. And we actually have engineering workshops, and I realized I had not changed this slide out, so we can do this. Watch this here. We had to cancel these. I didn't like doing that, but we had to cancel these. So just on July 11th so far, and we still need a few signups. Otherwise, we might have to cross the Genesee County one out as well. I don't really want to do that. So if you haven't been on one of these webinars before, Zoom, just a reminder, lower left is your audio settings. Please open the chat pod up. That will not be active. However, that's how we're going to send you links. So you don't have to type things in or search. You can just click on the links that are going to be coming out. And we'll give you a few seconds to launch that, and it'll pop back up, and you'll be able to just click on the links for the handout and to access the polls that we're going to be doing. I may ask you to raise your hands now and then please open the Q&A. That is a place I do want feedback. We're going to be using that as well as the polls throughout our time together this morning. Okay, so let's do a couple of quick welcomes. And again, we're going to be using PollEV for this. Okay, so we're going to start with who you work for and all that. If you're in the summer intern program, give me the agency that you're working with. Okay, so I work for a town, a county, a city or village, state or federal, tribal, consultants, contractors, or the weekend. We'll see how many of the folks are here. Really, everybody's working for the weekend, but we'll see. And if you can't access the polls, you can throw it into the Q&A. But again, if you put other, or you put your level of government rather than just government, what level you're at, town, county, village, city, things like that. That helps me. It also is helpful for to see how many folks are on. So we have some consultants. About half the folks are consultants. We have a bunch of towns, a bunch of counties, city or village, and about a quarter of you say you're working for the weekend. Okay. So what is your job? What are you doing? Okay. Are you an administrator? You're the highway superintendent, commissioner, an engineer, field crew, supervisor, board member. And if you're one of the people in our summer intern program, put in none of the above. And that'll give me a sense. You could throw it into the Q&A if you want to say that, but I'm just trying to get a sense of how many folks are on today. And if you'd rather call yourself an engineer for the summer, hey, that's okay too. Okay, we got about 2/3 of you are engineers. Okay, and we have administrator. Okay, cool. Now, where are you from? This one's fun. You get to click on the map. You can actually put your mouse and click. We got our friend who's in Lake Ontario. His boat's moved a little bit, but okay. So quite a bit of variety around the state, everything from Long Island to Buffalo and 2 people in the lake. Okay. Okay, so we got rural, we got urban, we got one person who's probably here in Ithaca. Okay. So what we're going to be talking about today comes, and there's a handout that will outline and go through this, and you're more than welcome to, take advantage of that handout. Any comments or anything, just let us know. But we're going to talk about understanding and estimating the cost of projects. This could be for repairs, like you're going to be doing if you're in the summer intern program, you're developing an asset management system. It could be for a project. And we'll talk about the level of accuracy we need and things like that as we go through the day. Now, there's an old saying in the world of civil engineering that for repair options, you can pick out of the choice of good, fast, and cheap, any two. Now, it's not completely true, but there is a bit of truth behind it, like all pithy sayings that really aren't as true as we'd like them to be. But the idea is, as you're developing your repairs, if you think about it, if you need to do it faster, you may have to spend a little bit more money because you may have to pay for overtime. You may have to pay for a 5th day if you're a 4-day-a-week organization. So that's where that comes from. We'd love to have all three, but the main thing we don't want to do is fast and cheap. We don't want to rush. Okay, here's a case where somebody got a bit of a rush on a foundation. It did lead to a fatality. They just didn't have enough in the foundation design. When they put them in, they were trying to put these up quickly, and it led to some issues. A lot more complicated than we can talk about in a webinar. But when you're thinking about repairs, think of good and fast or good and cheap, and understand how you're going to be doing your operations. And that's really important when you're developing your costing. Now, in terms of getting your work done, we're going to determine the work that is needed, and we're going to do an exercise, actually several exercises together today to show how that works. We're going to plan the work activities. We're going to write them out. We're going to calculate the cost for each of those activities, sometimes as a single unit. Sometimes we break it into components and calculate the cost for each of the components and then add them up. Then, of course, we're going to have to implement things, so there'll probably be changes when you're out in the field. But one of the things about a good repair cost when you're doing estimating is if you've done a good job, you really should understand where you're missing and not be that far off. How much depends on what level you're looking at, how tight you sharpen your pencil. But these are things to think about. And the other thing about doing repairs is you can develop yourself a full scope of the work that you're going to do and make sure you have a really good plan because you really want to plan from start to finish. So as an example, you don't want to be like these gentlemen who were putting in security ballards next to a building in London, England, and they were using a quick set cement that sets up in about half an hour. And they did this so that you can't park a big van next to the building. And you probably can tell that they had to go get a jackhammer to get their own van back out because they had forgotten about the fact they were inside the security zone. So make sure you've thought the whole process through. And so to understand this, we're going to do an exercise in scoping. Okay, and we're going to do this several times during the course of our little hour together. And the idea of a scoping exercise is we're going to go all the way from planning to maintenance. So when you're doing civil engineering, you're going to plan a project, you're going to scope it out, you're going to design it. Once you've got a good scope, you're going to construct it, and then you want to think about the maintenance that you're going to be doing later on. And we'll do this with a couple of repair options, but to get us started, let's pick one everybody understands, no questions asked. Let's do an ice cream sundae. Okay, now think about the best ice cream sundae, not necessarily the one in the picture, that's just an illustration. Think about the best ice cream sundae you could possibly make. And what I want you to think about is what are the things you need? What are the steps to get it done? Assuming we want to go from starting with nothing all the way up to being ready to make the next ice cream sundae. So everything's back in the cupboards, everything's back in the fridge. So open up PolyV and start putting in the things we need to make a really good ice cream sundae. Let's see what you guys come up with. You need a bowl, absolutely. Yep. Maybe you want hot fudge. Yeah, good. A spoon. We've done this exercise before. We've had times when people forgot to put the spoon in. That's good. You'll need ice cream. I see somebody over in the Q&A put that they'd like to have nuts on their sundae. Okay, that's good. We could have nuts. That's cool. Okay. You need something to scoop the ice cream out of the bowl, of the container with the ice cream and put it into the bowl. Yeah, that may not be a spoon because you try to do that with a spoon, you might bend the spoon. That's not a bad idea. Whipped cream. Ooh, that's a good idea. Okay. Anything else you're going to put on your ice cream sundae? Some people put a cherry on it. Okay. Some people put sprinkles, some put caramel. The idea is you think the whole process through. Somebody wanted chocolate syrup on the Q&A. Okay. Now, obviously, if it's a group of people, you're going to have to negotiate what flavor of ice cream, what fruit or not fruit, what are you going to have? Are you going to let people do their own? Is there anything else we still have to do to make this process work? I'm looking for three things that I don't see. Let's see what we've got. There's three things I'm still looking for. You need to eat it. Yep. Yeah, you actually need to consume it. Once you make it, you got to eat it. That's part of the process. Remember, we're going from start to finish, so we can do it again. Okay. So yeah, you need to eat it. You need to be hungry. Okay. But if it's a good ice cream sundae, are you going to make a mess? Do you need a napkin? Yeah, you probably need a napkin. You need a freezer available or a fridge. You got to have stuff in stock. Do you have to go to the store? Think about the whole process from start to finish, because that's all part of the cost. And of course, when you're done, what else do you have to do after you've finished eating? Let's see if anybody puts it on there. Yep, there it goes. You got to clean the dish and the spoon or whatever you use. You got to clean everything up, put it away so you're ready to do it again. Because we do most things again and again and again. It's not a one time, especially when you're developing repairs like you're going to be doing on a roadway. So keep that in mind. Okay. So we're going to do this scoping exercise a couple more times with some actual repair options, but just to keep that in mind. Now, once we have our scope, once we have our plan in place, we then have to calculate the cost. And there are lots of different ways you can do that. But I'm going to give you an acronym that I use that helps me out. I'm going to have my material cost. I'm going to have my invoices. These are contract expenses that directly go to a particular job. I might have some labor, and I might have some equipment. And this is your own labor and equipment. If you're with a town or a county or a local government or even a contractor, it's your own labor and equipment. It's not people you're bringing from the outside in and you're contracting with them. These are your own people. Okay. And we need to include all of them if we're going to compare apples to apples, because otherwise, a lot of people will say, well, I'm not going to include my own labor and equipment because I'm already paying for it. And it does change in terms of what you might do or not do. We do that here in terms of what can we afford within our budget. But if you're trying to compare whether you're going to have a contractor do the work or you're going to do it with your own crew, you have to include the cost of your own crew and equipment so you can get a good comparison. Should you need all four? So that's pretty important. And of course, you need to make sure you've thought the whole process through and you have included everything, including the cost of moving the item from one point to another. In this particular case, they were moving a backhoe, a very large one, from one site to another. They forgot to release the hydraulics. The machine picked up, and it came very close to destroying this bridge. It survived long enough for them to safely get everybody off, close the interstate. It was pretty amazing. So make sure you've thought the whole process through. And then once you have that, and you know how much materials you need, how many invoices you need, what's your labor and equipment, you can then calculate the cost. And if you haven't figured it out now, there's an acronym here, MILE, or mile. So you're going to drive that extra mile. So let's do some estimation of the amounts. Now, when you're estimating the amounts, you could estimate exactly how much material you need, but especially when you're doing road repairs, you really want to use day size units for productivity. in the Q&A, can somebody tell me why I recommend using day size units for productivity, especially if you're developing this for repair cost or asset management? Why would I use day size units for productivity? See if somebody can tell me why in the Q&A, why I would recommend you use. You got to deal with the weather. Yeah, that makes a big difference. In fact, weather is something you actually have to account for when you're doing your calculations, but I'm looking for something else. I'll give you another 20, 30 seconds. It's simpler. Yeah, that's actually a pretty important point. It keeps things cleaner. Okay. And if you think about it, you're in a small agency, and but how far long does it take to get from the garage all the way out to the end of the town and back? You have to deal with the fact that you've got to mobilize. Okay. So if you were calculating the cost of putting in, say, a small patch, they're doing some patching out near in front of our building. If you just calculate the cost of the patch, well, that might take you 4 hours, but if it takes you 2 hours to get to the site, get everything set up, including the work zone, and then 2 hours to get back, well, there's your 8 hour day. So by doing a day size unit, you deal with productivity. And if it's a multi-day thing, you can deal with that as well by just dividing by the number of days it takes to do the work. So it builds in mobilization. Mobilization is a pretty important item because it takes cost that we sometimes don't include. So if using day size unit, the mobilization gets built in, and that actually makes it a little easier to track. Okay? And you have to demobilization as part of that as well, as Pat put in. Very good. Now, at the end of this whole process, we want a total amount. Okay? And yes, Pat, you're right. You can store equipment on site. You would include that in your initial cost, the cost of moving it there and then storing it later on. But the goal here at the end of this, frankly, what we're really looking for, we all know this, what our real goal at the end of the day is, what we really want is we want dollars. Yep, get a different pen color because that color is not going to be good at all. There we go. We want the cost. That's what we want. But if we're trying to put this into a plan, we're doing repair cost, we need to calculate units of cost. So units of linear units going down the road, or the area, surface area of the roadway, or something like that. And so different repairs are going to have different unit cost. As an example from the world of aviation, the runway, would that be a linear or an area unit? Well, actually, typically they do an area because runways vary in width. But you might actually be able to do a calculation that's just looking at the center line. If you're talking about the stripes on the pavement, maybe you're just doing a linear analysis. So think about that. So in the Q&A, think of the kind of repairs that you've seen or that you do. Give me an example of something that's a linear repair that you would actually need to calculate the cost per, oh, say, whoop, a pen dropped off on me. Cost per linear foot. Putting up guide rail. Yep, that's a possibility, though you have to account for both sides. Curbs, very good. Yep. And it could be per mile. The whole nice thing is you can convert. We'll talk about dimensional analysis here in a little bit. Yep. Anything you're doing that's linear would be a good example. Okay. Stripes on the roadway would be a possibility. Ditching might be a possibility, things like that. How about something that's an area-based activity? That the width of the road matters. Trimming would be a good linear one too as well. Yep. Give me some examples of something that would be area-based. Yeah, applying a tack coat or a chip seal. Something that, because road widths aren't always the same. Okay. Seeding an area might be something you look at. Again, you just have to decide how you do it. Putting in a base material, possibly. Patching potholes might be an area-based calculation. So these are all things to think about. So let's go through and look at those 4 items that we've got here. Let's look at materials. Now, materials are things that you buy separately and you store them on site and you pull from the stockpile. okay? And they come in two types primarily. You have divisible materials. These are things that you're not counting individual items, such as gravel or salt or stone. You get a big pile of it. You're not counting individual rocks. You're really just counting how much you use, and it's probably in some unit that's either volumetric or weight-based, per ton, per cubic yard, things like that. What else can you think of that's a material that you would only essentially measure it out by some volumetric or weight-based item that you might be using? What would be something you'd store on site and you'd be pulling out as a stockpile? And by the way, if you haven't got a clue, think about something in the kitchen, and you can give me something that you would be putting in the kitchen that you would do that. Yeah, salt. Yep, we have that. What else? Well, if you were making a cake, you would have flour. You're not going to measure individual grains of flour. If you're out in doing work, if you've got brine that you're using, you might be pulling the brine from a tank. You might be doing paint or oil. Yeah, anything that you would measure by the volume you use or the weight of it, and you don't count individual items, those are called divisible loads. And there's permits and other things you got to worry about. Versus stockpiled items, these are things you count, like a culvert pipe, or signs, or the posts that go with it, or the guide rail that's put up, the lengths of rail and things like that. And the main reason you want to track that is because you typically have to worry a little bit more about the loss when it comes to divisible activities versus stockpiled items. Okay, now you don't want loss like this. Again, the guy had his truck bed up, he didn't realize it, and he hits the sign, and those signs are actually pretty dang strong. But you may want to include a little bit of loss or waste. Okay, so for instance, if you've got a pile of gravel and you think it's got 100 cubic yards in it, the reality is you're probably only going to get out of it about 95 cubic yards. You're going to lose some due to this loss that occurs. Okay, so just keep that in mind when you're doing the calculations. A good way to do this is round up versus, you hope you're not losing pieces of culvert pipe. That would be pretty bad. You want to use whole lengths of that. Okay. If you're not sure, ask. It doesn't hurt. Okay. Now, these are things you brought in, you stockpiled them, and then you have to assign them to a particular repair or a particular project versus an invoice where you get it directly to the job. Okay. Now, sometimes it could be one or the other. But like, for instance, some agencies actually do stockpile emulsion, not very many, but emulsion, like you'd be using in a chip seal or a tack coat, would be something you'd get a ticket and it would be assigned to a particular roadway or a particular project, and you'd actually do the calculation of the cost. It could include equipment rental. If you rent equipment that you don't own, you could get invoiced directly to a particular job, and in that particular case, you would actually just apply it, you'd be done. Now, if you're doing multiple jobs with that piece of equipment, you have to parse out, 2 days on this job and 2 days on that job. But generally, you're still getting an invoice, and you just have to parse that out. And of course, any contracts that you've got would be a primary way to get invoices. When you're doing an invoice, the main thing, especially when you're getting materials delivered, you have to make sure you understand one of two ways you can get materials. You could pick it up at the plant, or you could have it delivered and placed in position. So you're paying for that cost of delivery. And the term that's used is FOB, okay? Freight on board, free on board. There's lots of people have different words that those FOB stands for, but the idea, if you see the term FOB, that means you picked it up at the plant, at the facility, at the Home Depot, and you've got to pay for the cost of shipping it in addition to the material itself, versus you pay for stone and you're paying an extra amount of money and it gets delivered to the site. It's probably a stockpile site, but still you're paying for that. It could even be putting it and placing it and putting it in position. Just make sure you understand those differences. Make sure you understand what you're getting delivered and what you're paying for. And I hope none of you have a Coca-Cola for lunch today. So just understand that difference of the cost, because you may have to add that cost in. Now, where can I get my material and invoice prices? Somebody in the Q&A, give me a couple of examples. Where could I go get prices? Because, I don't really want to spend a ton of time on this. I just want to get good numbers. Where could I get prices? You could go out to Dodge and Means reports. There's a whole series of reports that are out there that are published. You can find them in libraries that have estimated cost for particular areas. There's source wells and other people who have contracts who will give you pricing that's out there. Yep. There's bid books that could be at the state level or a county level bid. You can take advantage of those contract prices. You can usually use them. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. Some locals do their own bids as well, and you could piggyback off each other, and that's a discussion for another day. So yeah, these are all ways you can get prices. But especially if you're just developing cost for budgeting purposes, a phone call and getting an estimate or a quote is usually pretty good. You call up a local contractor and you say, how much would it be to chip seal this particular road? And they might say, well, how long is it? How wide is it? Ask some other characteristics, but they can give you an estimate. And that actually would probably be pretty good. It'll be within 5 or 10, maybe 15%, but still from a budgetary standpoint, that's not too bad. And yes, somebody put in the idea of going to the office of the state comptroller. Yeah, state comptroller bids could be good. And some of those materials, by the way, could be a materials bid. It could be in place. You can actually include the cost of getting the emulsion put down for a chip seal, for instance, on some of the bids. So yeah, the service contracts are available to you. So look for those things. Not too bad. Office of General Services, OGS bids. Look for those. There's some links on the handout so you don't have to memorize these things. No point in going crazy. There's tons of them. Here's the biggest issue. Make sure you're getting what you need and what you want. So you want to make sure you've written down some details. That's where bids are developed from. In fact, using bids is nice because you can actually see what they ask for. Because you want to make sure if you asked for chicken, you got chicken. Okay? So make sure you know what you're getting. Now, you're going to get a price. That price is not going to be in the unit that you need. Because remember, your unit you need is dollars per linear foot, per square foot, per square yard, per mile, some unit per some area or linear unit. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to determine the quantity you need for production, the total day, and you're going to have to convert that to your unit. And that's pretty important. It's called dimensional analysis if you want to be technical about it. But the idea is you're going to go in and you're going to calculate out something. So if you're given a price, get my pen working here. And if you're given something that's in dollars per gallon, say for instance an emulsion, okay, and you're going to be spraying it at a rate of some gallons per square yard or square foot or square unit. And what we need at the end of the day is dollars per square foot. You're just going to do dimensional analysis. And here's the easiest way I know to do this. You essentially create yourself what you need. In this case, dollars per square foot, and write down what you know. In this case, we know dollars per gallon. We know gallons per square yard for our application rate. And I need to get rid of the square yards, so I'm going to now put square yards and square feet. And then I wind up coming in here, and I'm purposely going to change my colors because I can. I can cross off the gallons. I can cross off the square yards, and I'm left with dollars per square foot. And it can get really complicated, but it's really pretty easy, and it's important. You want to get it right. And it can be really challenging when you're switching units, gallons to square feet. If you're somehow having to go from metric to US customary or vice versa. So make sure you get your units right, whether it's squared or linear or things like that, and everybody wins, okay? And you want to get that right, because if you get it wrong, things can go haywire, okay? In fact, hello, pen. There we go. Make sure you can see the bridge a little easier. This actually is a case whereby somebody didn't convert their units right, and they put more load down than they thought, and they found out that their bridge couldn't handle the loads. We're not having to deal with that with costing, but it's still something to think about. Now, in terms of labor, it's your own crew, okay? Would you include benefits? Let me raise your hand if you think we should include benefits. Let's see how many of you think we should include benefits. So far, about a quarter of you say you should include benefits. If you're trying to compare whether you're going to do it or you're going to hire a contractor, you're paying them enough to cover their benefits. So if you're going to compare them, you need to include your benefits as well. If you think about it, you really do. Now, I know lots of towns and counties around the state put their benefits into a single pool and they don't break them out. So that it's sometimes hard to tell what those rates actually are, but they're absolutely critical. When I started in the world of civil engineering, I worked for a county over west of here, about an hour, and the benefit rate that we had to use back then was about 30%. The benefit rate today varies depending on where I am here on campus, but in some cases, in some projects, it can be as high as 70%, 68.3 if you want to be precise. You need to know the benefit rate. And good news is you can use a single benefit rate usually for your whole municipality. Check with the elected board. It should be something that they can give you, even if it's not in the budget. And we'll talk about how you can deal with that when you're dealing with budget issues later on. And then you're going to use average rates. Now, if you're a really small agency, you're not going to have average rates. I know that. Okay. But round it then, get it close. Don't tell people exactly what somebody makes. You can also hide the benefit number in there, and we'll show you how to do that with a spreadsheet here in just a little bit. Now, if you're the highway official and you're managing the department, you're paid out of a different part of the funds. If you're with a town, for instance, here in New York, you're going to actually be paid out of the general fund versus the highway fund for a variety of reasons. Should I include that time or include your own time if you're a highway official? What do you think? I'm going to lower everybody's hands real quick and let you answer that question again. Yes or no? Yep, several of you say yes. Again, if you're doing comparisons, the key here is, and this is actually something to think about, is if a person's not going to be on the job the entire time, you might not charge them 100% of their time. It might be an equivalent. So maybe a quarter time equivalent or a half time equivalent. And that's something you can actually include when you're looking at the labor. But again, if you're trying to do comparisons, it's pretty important to understand what you're comparing. So you're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges, as opposed to plums and kumquats or something. And again, a lot of it comes down to making sure you understand what you're paying for and what you're not paying for. At least this guy here, by the way, is honest. He's looking for cash for alcohol research. I'm not too sure about his research process, but at least he's a little clever. And the same thing is true with your equipment. It's your own equipment, because again, it costs money to run that equipment. So the easiest thing to do there is make a list. Make a list of the equipment you own. You could even also, by the way, use this to start making a list of the equipment you'd like to own, and maybe now you're renting or borrowing from another agency. And then you're going to go out and you're going to get per hour cost. Okay? So you get your per hour cost and things like that. And where do you get that? Well, there's lots of places to get that. There is still you can still find on the web the old numbers from the state DOT, their equipment rental rate book. It's called the Blue Book. Though I will tell you right now, I would advise you to, if you're still using that old book, I would advise you, it's so far out of date. I would come in here and I'm going to go and watch this trick. Once my pen wakes up. And in this case, I'm going to pick a color that will hide it pretty well. We'll do that one. Stop. Oh, the blue's not, that's not going to work at all. Let's try this again. Try that. There we go. Stop using that. It's too far out of date. The numbers are way short of what you would need. So if you're still using the old blue book, it's not been updated, and I'd advise. In fact, they're actually saying you should be using the FEMA rates. Okay, and you've got a link to that. You don't have to remember that. But FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, has cost for equipment. And if you don't have that, or you can't find it from a rental book or in a report like Means or Dodge, you can also call up your company and say, how much would you charge me for this? And you could use that number. The idea is get yourself a rental cost so you know how much it's costing you to run a piece of equipment. Normally we'll do a per hour cost, but some agencies will do a per day cost. Just keep that in mind when you're doing your calculations later on. Okay? Now, the last thing is we need to think about is contingency. And I'm not talking about this loss that you're getting because of pile of stones, you lost a little bit off of it. You're whipped off, as some people say. This is the general overhead rate. It deals with the fact that, as was mentioned in some of the Q&As earlier, weather can delay things. You could have underestimate of what you actually think the cost is or miss something. So generally we want to have an increase in the overhead rate. So it's a multiplier. So if I think the cost is $100,000, I'm going to increase the actual amount that I'm estimating to account for this contingencies, things like that. So what error level would you use? What contingency would you estimate? Throw in the Q&A what you think what the amount should be. I'm going to increase the overall estimate of cost a little bit. What do you think? See what you think. 20%? Okay, I could live with 20%, especially if you're not real good and sure of things. Okay. Some people say as much as 30. Okay, I probably would try. I want to do better than 30. Okay. If you've got this down and over time you slowly increase the quality of your estimates, truth be told, you can get down as close to 5 to 10%. But that's not something you're going to do on the first try. The numbers I'm seeing in the Q&A, which are in the 20 to 25% range, are much more likely on your first estimate. So the goal would be, over time, is to get those numbers down. By the time I left the county, I had rates that were in that range, but not on the first try. But want to have a little contingency. And if it's a project, it's brand new, you've never done it before, yeah, you're probably going to have a little bit more. But we don't want those 50, 75, or even 100% contingencies you see. You haven't done a good job in your estimation if you're that far off. And it's important to get it right, not just for estimating things, but also, of course, in the world of engineering, we want to get our weights right so we know what the roads and the loads and the bridges can handle. Now, in terms of total cost, simple rule, at the end of this whole process, remember you're going to be putting it into a spreadsheet. You're going to be putting it into the computer. Round the data down or round it up, but don't use all the digits just because your calculator says, oh, it's 14.62397. No, no, no. Use the 3-digit rule. Rather than using some big fancy computer with a big calculator and something like that, and, like you're building a submarine for the Navy, think about an old slide rule. If you've never seen a slide rule, it's actually pretty cool. You can do all kinds of math with it, but you're not going to carry extra digits. Don't carry the extra digits. You're probably at best going to know 3. Sometimes you don't even know that. And if you think about a cost per square unit or per linear unit, $1.15 versus $1.14.5 or 1.145, round it up anyway. You're only talking 0.5% at that point. You're not talking much. So round it up, give yourself a little contingency there. Don't carry those extra digits. It's not worth it. Okay, so what's the process? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to write out the construction steps. We're going to estimate the time to complete them, and then we'll calculate the cost for each step, and we'll add all the steps together. It's actually a pretty simple process. If you've done a good job on the scope, on the initial development of the steps, it actually isn't too bad. but you gotta have a good plan in place. Does anybody want to own this house? Unless you're a skateboarder Tony Hawk, it's really be hard to get a small car into that garage. So probably not. You really need to think about maybe a little bit better shape for that driveway. Maybe move that garage back a little bit so you can actually get into the garage. Okay. Now, when we're doing work on roads, we have work zone traffic control. Do I include the work zone traffic control? I'm going to lower everybody's hands and let's see what you guys think. Raise your hand if we should include work zone traffic control. Yeah, we should. Again, if you're comparing apples to apples, if you're asking a contractor to do work and you expect them to have work zone traffic control, you should include it at the same level if you really want to compare things. Okay. So yes, the nice thing is in this case, you can very easily calculate that separately and add it back in. So a lot of times when I'm doing my initial, I don't include the work zone cost, but I can add it back in pretty easily. So we're going to do some more project exercises. Okay, that's how we're going to finish our time up. And when we do those project exercises, we can think about different things that we could be doing. Okay, so for instance, we did an ice cream sundae. You could actually think about that for a taco as well. Okay, there's all kinds of different things that you can think about for a project. But what we'll do is we'll do some real road ones. Okay, and to make your job easier, we'll do an exercise in just a second. One of the links you've got is to a spreadsheet that we developed that can help you with the costing, okay? And it's broken into two components. It's broken into a totals page, which adds everything up, and we'll do an example together. And then I've got the labor and equipment on a page, and I've got materials and invoices on a page. And it adds it all up, and we'll walk through this process. Here's the cool thing about this, okay, is you can put in your own labor and equipment. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So in this case, we're going to come in here. We'll bring up an example. And I've put in the labor and equipment for my department. Okay. And I put in that. And the nice thing is by separating that out, if you want to budget things differently, you can, but now you can do apples to apples comparison. So it's pretty important to do this. And the nice thing about a spreadsheet is it's easy to repeat. Okay. And then you can do the materials and the invoices and see what the prices are. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a few exercises. I'm going to start with, purposely, I'm going to start with a ditch. Okay. Now, there's some issues we've got with some ditches. They're too deep, but let's assume this ditch is being done. It's not complete yet. But think about ditching. What I want to do is I want to do that same scoping exercise we did with our ice cream sundae, or that you could think about doing for a taco. I want you to think about that for ditching. What are the steps? What are the pieces of equipment that we need? What are the things like that? But let me clear the responses and have you put in here for ditching, what is the scope? What are the things we need? How many trucks do we need? What equipment do we need? You'll need your work zone traffic control. You'll need a dump truck. You might need one, you might need two. Okay, what else? You'll need an excavator, something to dig the thing with. Absolutely. Yep. Okay, we've got traffic control, we've got laborers. You're going to need some hand labor. You're going to need some personnel. You'll need the flaggers with the work zone traffic control. Okay. You'll need a spoil site to where you take this thing. So you have to account for how far you have to drive it. So that might change the cost if you have to drive it a long way. And there's some rules about that. Okay. You'll need operators to run the trucks. You'll need an operator to run the backhoe. Yep. If you're doing work, you might be replacing culverts while you're at it. Again, here's a nice thing is if you're going to include that in your cost, you could add that on together. Okay. I'm looking for three things still in my ditching operation. Okay. at the end of the process, let me go back up. I said this ditch isn't done. What's left to be done here? And I'll see if anybody puts it in. And by the way, somebody put in, there it is, seeding showed up. Yeah, you got to seed this. You don't want to leave that exposed. You got to seed it or line it with stone or whatever you're going to do to finish it so it won't erode away. So that's pretty important. Somebody was talking about possibly some fees for dumping the materials. Again, depending where you are, there may be a fee to dump the materials. It may not be just considered clean spoil. So this is something you have to think about, okay? And then, of course, people put down trucks, and I may be just being picky, but is it the trucks to haul the material, or is it the truck to get the crew out there? You may need both, okay? So these are all things that you're going to need. So let's go back to our spreadsheet, okay? And here's the nice thing is, again, we set this up. So we're going to come over here. We're going to be in the municipality of Orville. I could name it whatever I want. Put in the name, put in the project's name, and put in the date. Anything you write down, you should put in your date, your name, what you're doing, where you're doing it for, all of those items. And if you're out in the field, if you're doing field notes, put the weather. This is very important for later on, 2, 3 years down the road. Who did it? When was it done? Is it out of date? Oh, and by the way, in case of liability, really important to know the weather. So make sure you include all these facts, fill everything out. Now, production. Again, the spreadsheet is set up, you could do it per hour. I did it per day because mobilization gets built right in, and a ditch we'll assume is linear. Though remember, most roads have 2 ditches, but not always. But you could account for that later on when you're doing your analysis on the roadway, okay? So, let me ask you this. How many feet of ditching can you get done in a day? I need to put in my length that I get done for my production level work. How many feet can I get done in a day ditching? If you don't know, ask. That's why we have the interns. That's why you're hooked up with the municipal people. They should be able to tell you how many feet they get per day. I can tell you the number we've got, but I was going to see if anybody here can tell me how many feet you think you ditch in a day with an excavator dumping into the truck, if you had the right number of trucks. 50 feet? I'm hoping I could do more than 50 feet, okay? Because 50 feet would be only what I saw in that picture, okay? When I was with the county, when I got there, we were averaging about 500 feet a day. I see 500. We'll use 500, though I can tell you if you take less material out, you can clear more ditching. And cleaning ditches, you should get more than 500 feet. We're going to assume, though, like in the picture, there was a little bit of reshaping on there. And there may be some time restrictions. These are all things to think about. But we'll put in 500 feet, okay? And it's, again, you then do that, and it's 100% of the road. 100% linear. If it's both sides, you might only get 250. You have to think about how you're doing your calculation. Now, in terms of labor and equipment, again, here's what's nice. You've got a day length. I'm assuming a 10-hour day, but if you're an 8-hour day agency, you would put in 8. And then you just look at how many people you need. So the highway superintendent may not be going out at all. So maybe we don't need the highway superintendent in this case. But we're definitely going to need a crew leader then, right? We need 1 crew leader. We need an HEO to run the operate the machine. Okay, that's a heavy equipment operator, or whatever title that's used. Okay, so we need 1 of those. We need to have the medium equipment operator. Okay, these are the people that drive the trucks. 1 truck or 2. Go into Q&A. Whoever's first, I'll put in 1 truck or 2. 2, we'll do 2 today. I can tell you right now, the number of trucks is really depending where the spill site is. So you need to sort of think about an average number of trucks that you might need. There are times when you might need 3, depending where you have to haul it to. So, but again, that's the cool thing about a spreadsheet. You can do some what if games. And then laborers, you need somebody to clean things up. And we're going to assume the work zone traffic control is done separately just because we're only here together for an hour. Okay, so we're going to assume 1 laborer just to get it going on. Okay. And then somebody says, what about long-time projects with pay raises? Yeah, if you're doing a long-time project with pay raises, you're going to have to increase these numbers. These is assuming it's short enough, it's a repair option. They're like you're doing a chip seal or ditching or something like that. But if it was like putting in a bridge, you'd have to account for that. When I do our plans here at the local roads program, I have to account for the fact that during the course of the year, there will be a pay raise, and I have to guess what that number is going to be. Okay. So you have to put these things in. And again, you need to know the benefit rate. Um, does anybody know the benefit rate in your municipality? If you do, throw it in the Q&A. We can change things. Okay. And while you're doing that, I'm going to put in my equipment. I've got 2 trucks. We already said that. For ditching, I don't need a loader. I don't need a grader. I need 1 excavator. I got a pickup to get everybody on the sites. I don't need a roller. I don't need a dozer. I don't need a sweeper. I don't need to borrow anything. Okay? Okay, so we're in pretty good shape. We now have the cost of the labor and equipment. And somebody says benefit rate of 40%. So I'll put in 40%. Again, find out what your rate is. I will tell you right now, it would be unlikely to be less than 35 to 40, but it may be much higher. As I said, we're at 68.3, depending on some sources of funding in some of our projects. Okay, now, before I go to the materials and invoicing page, in the Q&A, what do I need for materials for ditching or invoices? Am I going to be invoiced anything? Probably not. So what do I need for materials? What do I need for materials? I need my restoration, my grass seed, my stone, whatever I'm going to line my ditch with, okay? So I'm just going to say, for the sake of argument, I'd like to be able to just use grass because it's cheap, okay? I can get grass, it's a little more than $5 per pound right now, but I can get a price for grass seed, and then I just got to figure out how much I need per linear foot, okay? So how much do I need per linear foot or per 500 feet or whatever the thing is? In this case, I need 500 feet of grass seed. How much am I going to use? Well, not going to be a lot. It's probably going to be about 1 to 2 pounds per foot at most, probably not even that. So we're probably talking in the range, actually probably 30 to 40 pounds of grass seed at worst. So I'll put in 30 just to give ourselves a number. And again, you can start estimating, you can put numbers in, you know that they're essentially a swag guess, you know, that you're just guessing. Make a note that you did that. You put that in, you got a cost, now you're in pretty good shape. Now, this is why I'm a firm believer that we need to include the cost of your own labor and equipment. If I was trying to decide as an agency, do I do ditching or do I contract it out? Well, if you look at the cost of everything combined, because now it's all added up, the materials is only 4% of the cost. In fact, if I didn't use grass seed, it would be free, technically, if you didn't include your own labor and equipment. The labor and equipment is most of the cost for a project like ditching, where it's almost entirely internal, it's mostly labor-based. So you have to include that for comparison. But from a budgetary standpoint, I understand that, yes, you are already paying for those people, but could they do something else? There's an opportunity cost that would come into that case, okay? Now, the other thing we did when we set this spreadsheet up that's pretty cool is you can come in here now and you can look at a different roadway. And let's just say that we've got a cost in this particular case of $3,400. Well, if I wanted to do 1,000 feet of roadway with a 5% contingency, it would actually calculate the cost that you've got there. And then you could do a unit cost from all of this pretty easily, okay? So a unit cost wouldn't take you that much because you would just take the total cost and divide it by the number of the units that you've got right there. So that'd be pretty easy. And if you want, we've given you some help with conversion factors and something like that. And by the way, if you want to get a unit cost, you can cheat, put in 1 foot. Come on, computer, there you go. And it will give you a cost, but it rounds it to the closest dollar. So I usually put in 100 feet. And then that would be 7.29 if you want the total cost per foot. Okay. So you can use this thing to get a project scope. So let's do one more. We have time for one more. Let me find there's the show. We'll do one more. We're going to do, in this particular case, we're going to do a chip seal. Okay. A chip seal is where you come along with asphalt emulsion. You cover it with a layer of stones, i.e. chips. Okay. And then you do both lanes, obviously. So we're going to do a scoping exercise for a chip seal real quick, and I'll clear this fast. And we'll quickly do a chip seal. Just think about the exercises. It gives you about a minute to do that. You're going to need a sweeper at the beginning and the end, a sweeper beforehand, a sweeper afterwards. Yep. Okay. What else we got? You're going to need laborers. You made the work zone traffic controllers. Again, we could add back in later on. Okay. You might need to make sure you've calculated the cost of any insurance from your stones, but if you're doing it right, you should have no stones flying. But most people don't sweep it soon enough, but that's a different issue. And some agencies go to slurry seals instead of chip seals because they're worried about stones. All depends on the agency. You got the stone. Yeah. Somebody put in, you got to have some stone. You got to have some emulsion. You got to have a thing to put the emulsion down. So think about the scoping exercise, and let's go back and look at our spreadsheet. Okay, in this particular case, I'm going to go and change this. We're now going to be doing a chip seal estimate. Okay, and today's date I should put in, actually. Okay, is this an area or a linear based? Well, it's going to be area based because a chip seal or a paving is going to vary somewhat. Okay, and then how much can I get done in a day? Let's assume it's 3 miles. Okay, so if it's 3 miles and you can't remember the number of feet per mile, you can always cheat. Okay, that's 15,840 feet. If you wanted to do a linear per foot, you could change that per mile if you'd prefer. Some people round things up just to make the estimates quick. Again, depends how tight you want to be. And so let's go look at our stuff in terms of our labor and equipment. I'll clear the labor and equipment for everything. Let's see what we've got for our own labor and equipment. Well, again, in this case, the superintendent might be out there half the day. So it's got to be half of his time or her time. Crew leader is going to be out there all day. You're going to have truck drivers, okay? You might have as many as 10 or 15, depending on your operation, how you set things up. I'm going to put in 10, and I got a question for you, and I'm going to assume a couple of laborers, and maybe I don't have anybody else. I have to use my heavy equipment operator. He costs a little bit more, but that's who my crew is, so I got a couple of them included on the job. You need to think about that. But let me ask you this. Let's say that you actually only have 2 heavy equipment operators and 5 medium equipment operators. But to do the job most efficiently, you need 10. What can you do? How can I solve the problem? And I really need 12 trucks, and I've only got 7 available. How can I overcome that problem? How could I overcome that problem? I could hire them. I could hire them via contract. That would actually show up under your invoice side. You'd actually pay for it out of the materials in the invoice side in that case. You could do a shared service with another agency. Absolutely. In that particular case, you would actually include them in the cost. And here's the reason why. If you borrow from another agency, the expectation is you're going to let them borrow your trucks and equipment some other day. So take your cost and just apply it. So you'd use 12 trucks if you needed 12 trucks. And so you need to make sure you have enough staff to do everything. In this case, I'm going to say 12 trucks one person to run a loader. I got a loader to roll everything up. I'm going to assume the roller that I use, I'm renting, but you get the cost of the calculations. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then you do the same thing with the materials in the invoices. You would come in here, you would put in the materials. Some things are things you stockpile. Okay, so maybe the stone is over here on the stockpile side, and that's paid by the cubic yard or by the ton. Okay, and it might be a little more than that, probably closer to 15. And you could do the calculations out. The biggest thing you're going to have to deal with here is you're going to have to convert. The cost of the stone might be per ton, but the application rate might be square yards, pounds per square yard. So you'll have to do that dimensional analysis to get that right. And you'll plug all of these values in. In fact, I should have. No, I have the patching one I included here. I didn't include the chip seal in this today's pack, but I'll pull that up just to illustrate what I'm talking about. So if you see, if I was doing patching, I would include the cost. Most of that gets invoiced to the project. And then I would get my total price when I'm done and plug everything in. And I'll zoom in a little bit. And then we'll let you go here in just a second. You can calculate all of your cost. Okay. And again, what's neat about this is you can do your cost, you can calculate things out, you can adjust, you can deal with the fact that, for instance, if you're patching, you may not be doing 100% of the road surface. So in this particular case, maybe you're actually only doing 25% that actually gets boxed out. Okay? So if you're only doing 25%, you're going to have less cost. Your cost per square yard or square foot goes down, and you can adjust for that. So if I wanted to get a unit cost, I could just assume 10 by 100, that's 1,000 square feet. And my total cost then becomes 1.197. I'm not going to put 1.197 in the computer. I'm going to put in what number? If it's the cost is 1197 and then divided by 1,000, what am I going to put in the computer when I'm actually doing the estimate? Put that in and then I'll let y'all guys go. In the Q&A, see if somebody tells me what number I should use. You could round it all the way to 2. That probably is a bit much because that's a huge difference. That's a 70% jump. Well, 37% jump. I would put in 1.20. So $1.20. So I would put in 1.20, round it up. Okay? Don't carry extra digits is my point here. With that, we could go crazy. We could have a lot of fun. We could do all kinds of exercises. We could do chip seals. We could do paving. Really, it comes down to when you're doing these calculations, put things in, make notes, write everything down, and if you're not sure, ask. And with that, I stole a couple of minutes of your time, but hopefully this was useful for you. If you have any questions, download the spreadsheet, send me a note, or Jeff can help you out. We want to get it right. The more accurate you get your pricing now, the better you're going to be setting up your budgets and doing your management plan later on. With that, everybody have yourself a good day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.